This video is about the events in the first book of the Savage Wars Trilogy, which is in the Galaxy's Edge series written by Nick Cole and Jason Anspach. If you want to know the origin of the Savages, I go over that in my previous video, which is also in this series. But in short, they were humans who fled planet Earth promising a better tomorrow to anyone who would board their ships. Before the ships left, at the time when the ships were still being constructed and the world was falling apart, Tyrus Rechs was young. His earliest memories are traveling around with his father in his old Ford pickup, hunting game for the survivalist compounds out west in the United States of America. If there were any governments left back then, they were fighting it out in the cities. Most everyone else had fled to the outskirts, and were either trying to scrape by out on their own or preying on others. Tyrus and his father spent 15 years moving around. No TV, not much contact with the outside world, just doing what they could, even if that involved justice. Back then, the only law there was in the cities, so it was left up to men like Tyrus's father and his son to enforce justice where they could. There was no hospitals of any kind, and not much in the way of doctors, so there was no surprise when Tyrus's father passed away from something, and he couldn't tell what it was. But before he passed, he was able to tell his son, Tyrus packed up what he could carry on his back, a rifle, and 2 pistols, and left for Georgia just like his father wanted, never really stopping for long until one day he almost threw it all away at a town called Brigadoon. Full of scientists and farmers, they seemed like they could figure it out, could find a way to survive the planet falling apart and rebuild. They put Tyrus up in an old shed, and he stayed there hunting game and varmints and whatever else they needed doing, even fell in love with a girl named Sophia. One day it was discovered that a pack of wolves had arrived north of the town and were fixing to kill off all the livestock they needed to survive, so Tyrus left to go take care of them. It took him 3 days. When he got back, he realized that a different kind of wolf had also discovered the town, the 2-legged kind. Tyrus searched the whole settlement, but they had killed everyone, even Sophia. Justice, not revenge. Tyrus hunted down the street thugs who had done this. They were moving around preying on those weaker than they were, and Tyrus realized what his father had meant. Someone had to be the line. Someone had to stop the wolves. Justice, not revenge. After that, he continued on his way to Georgia, found the government, joined the army, and became a ranger just like his father wanted. After humanity started colonizing the galaxy, they made leaps and bounds in technological advancement, especially in Spalurza. There was also the Vesper Confederacy, Rigel Assembly, and Britannia. But at this point, they had not yet formed the Republic, so they were known as the United Worlds, and as part of their membership, each member state assisted the others with what militaries they had, and the combined force was called the Coalition Military. But then the Savages appeared. These were the ones who had left centuries ago on their light huggers. They did not think of themselves as savages, they called themselves the Uplifted. The Savages were not about peace with humanity, because Savages viewed themselves as humanity's superiors. It happened time and again. A Savage Hulk would appear above a planet, but if instead of fighting them the planet tried to contact them to broker trade or even let them land their emissaries, the Savages would then take it all, would enslave the entire population or wipe them all out. However, sometimes after a planet was taken by the Savages, Tyrus Rechs would appear and trigger nuke the planet. It was the only way to be sure. Any discussion about Tyrus Rechs can't go on for too long without also mentioning his friend Casper Sola. If Tyrus Rechs could ever say anyone was his friend, Casper would be it. They both went through the same ordeal. Both had the same encounter with the Savages. I will do a future video on Casper Sola, who is another character in the Savage Wars Trilogy. Casper Sola is an admiral in the United Worlds Navy. His role is as liaison with the Coalition military, and he is the one that had convinced the Coalition to form this Task Force Wrath and take it to the Savages. Before this battle, there was a sort of stalemate. A Savage Hulk would show up at a planet. The Coalition military would send a militia. They would fight the Savages, and usually if they were successful, since there was always only one Savage Hulk, would either explode or disappear back into the dark. When Tyrus trigger nuked the planet, it ruined the planet forever, and because of this, he earned a less than stellar reputation. Tyrus Rechs has to hide his identity. He is known for now as Colonel Marks of the 25th Spalurza Light. His unit is currently attached to Strike Force Warhammer, Task Force Wrath, and they're headed to battle with the Savages at the planet New Vega. 5 tactical assault carriers with 1,240 people each, the Hernandez, Indomitable, Porter, and Montauk, were part of the advance assault. The plan was to stage at New Vega City Stadium, where they would be able to establish a foothold and set up for the rest of Task Force Wrath to arrive. But almost right away, things go to hell in a handbasket. Plans never survive first contact with the enemy. The Savages waste no time defending the newest planet they are claiming as their own. They start firing anti-air right away and send in their interceptors, which can move through both atmosphere and space, surprisingly, and the Hernandez is lost. The remaining carriers make it through the initial assault, but everyone on board all the ships are surprised by what they see. The Savage Hulk, all 10 kilometers, has actually landed on the ground inside the city and is looking like it will never take off again. The Montauk is able to land and 4 intact crawlers are able to disembark, but when it tries to regain altitude it gets shot down. The remaining carriers stay in the air and provide air cover while the 4 crawlers head out to guard the entrances to the stadium. Alpha Crawler is destroyed instantly by a railgun type weapon from the Savages, but the other crawlers are able to disembark and the companies set up in their assigned areas. After the first Savage wave is fought off, Delta Company is down to 50%. They are at the north end of the stadium. By this time, the Porter has landed in the stadium itself, and the Indomitable is 9,000 feet up east of the main city, finally joined by their Rodillion escorts. A heavy cruiser would come in and drop off the rest of the ground units, and they would all link up and assess the Savage presence in the city and how infested it was and rescue any civilians they could. There was no landing markers for the supercarrier to come in, but in the end it didn't matter. Supercarrier Highland GW Washington appears and starts dropping units all over the city. To the frustrated units of Task Force Wrath, it becomes apparent that the training for the different coalition military units from each of the members of the United Worlds is all over the place. Up to this point, though, a strong cohesive military has not even been needed. General Gilvey is the Supreme Coalition Commander for Operation Warhammer. He is operating under the way things had been. He was more worried about future career as a politician than about how to defeat the Savages. When the Coalition military had agreed to elect a Supreme Commander for this battle, they picked someone who was less military and more politician on purpose, to keep the Coalition military under United World's control. After General Gilvey arrives on planet, he puts out to all units to hunker down and wait for his orders. Except nobody told the Savages to wait for his orders, and they are full of surprises. The drone swarm from the Savage Hulk is devastating. It almost completely wipes out Task Force Wrath's artillery. Colonel Marks is ordered to take what is left of his unit and to link up with a unit of the Spanian Sentinels, which are giant tanks, and then have them set up and fire the main guns on the Savage Hulk to support the rest of the assault. While Colonel Mark's unit and the tankers are continuing on to their objective, we are introduced to another character, the Wild Man. I will do another video on him. He has a tragic story, but suffice to say that he willingly came to this planet after the rumors started swirling about a Savage Hulk appearing, even before the Coalition military arrived. He is a sniper, and his goal is to kill every single solitary Savage in the entire galaxy. He's not military nor a mercenary. He's a lone gunman with a singular focus. While the Wild Man is taking out one Savage at a time with his very large caliber sniper rifle, the tanks are moving forward towards the objective, firing their main guns. Suddenly, 2 of the tanks are trapped and exposed, and while spending their time trying to back out, the Savages use this time to fire down on the tanks and destroy one of them. Also, at the same time, Colonel Marks notices the very accurate single-shot sniper up in a building, which turns out to be Wild Man, but he doesn't really think about it since he has a mission to focus on. Of the artillery unit that had gotten wiped out by the drone strike, there was a lone survivor who knew how to operate the guns. We are introduced to another new character, Donald McAfee, who takes a long way around the shortcut. If you can finally convince him to focus enough, he will be able to assist. So the other survivors try to narrow down McAfee's wandering mind to operating artillery and firing at the Savages as soon as possible, which is easier said than done. The Savages had set up a corridor they wanted the Coalition to funnel down, and General Gilvey seemed all too happy to oblige them. Colonel Marks and his unit helplessly watch as General Gilvey's attacks stall again and again. Here at Front Street, the tanks are moving towards their objective and running into resistance. While the Savages fire on Colonel Marks and the tanks from a building across the street, artillery finally comes online. Colonel Marks uses his battle board to call in fire on that building. The drone Colonel Marks was using is shot down, and then the Savages do something else unexpected by hacking the Coalition military's digital battle space, and are able to knock it offline, at least temporarily. After the building the Savages are in is destroyed by their artillery strike, the tanks pull up and decide to stop and try to repair. So Colonel Marks decides to leave some of his men to guard the tanks and evac the wounded, while he takes the rest up to attempt to flank the Savage forces at Triangle Square. This is the place that General Gilvey has been assaulting all day long with no success. The problem turned out to be a hardened building the Savages had built up defensively, and then had cleared out all the buildings around so that none of the Coalition forces could sneak up on them and snipe them. Colonel Marks contacts General Gilvey and gives him the news. General Gilvey agrees to wait 5 minutes and then will send his men forward to attack again. Colonel Marks and Team Ranger assault the building and take the stairs. Each floor of the building has a Savage machine gun squad and are hardened by the Savages against assault, so taking the building turns into a slog. During this delay, General Gilvey decides to change his original plan of going forward himself with Task Force Wrath and taking the Triangle Square to instead using his Titan bombers to take out Triangle Square and the Savage Hulk all at once. He orders his S-3 to not give any warning to anyone on the battlefield over the radio because he was worried that the Savages had hacked it and would hear and be able to hide from the bombing run. In defiance of orders, the S-3 gets on the radio anyway and tries to warn friendly forces. However, it didn't matter because not only are the radios down, so friendly forces don't actually get the message, but the Savages can see the massive bombers incoming anyway. The original plan for the Navy was, when the Hulk took off and tried to escape the planet, the Navy would chase it down and destroy it. General Ogilvy contacts Admiral Sulla and explains his new plan. He reassures Admiral Sulla not to worry about civilian casualties. He has confirmed that they are all taking shelter underground anyway. Admiral Sulla agrees to move the naval units in and provide mop-up on whatever was left of the Savages after their Hulk is bombed into oblivion. Several things then happen almost all at once. The ground-based portion of Task Force Wrath is completely wiped out by its own bombers, which were hacked by the Savages during the bombing run itself. The Navy-based portion of Task Force Wrath arrives from hyperspace and starts attacking the grounded Savage Hulk. 4 Savage ships then emerge from hyperspace. The Coalition military immediately realizes that the old stalemate with the Savages is over. With the Savages now united together, the Coalition military will no longer be enough. After watching Task Force Wrath being bombed by his own bombers, the Navy showing up, and then getting blown to bits by the now allied Savages, General Ogilvy decides all is lost. He heads straight to the Porter. After boarding, the Porter takes off ignoring all comms from Admiral Sulla's group and heads straight back to the core to warn of the incoming United Savage invasion. After the remaining Coalition military forces are all gathered together at the landing site, Admiral Sulla himself flies in on board the assault frigate Chain and drops off 2 packages. He then proceeds to try to convince Colonel Marks to board the ship so they can all flee together. However, even this plan doesn't work out. When Colonel Marks changes into his armor and Admiral Sulla opens up the larger container, while they are arguing, everyone standing there realizes it's a trigger nuke. They also then realize who Colonel Marks really is. Tyrus Rechs, the man himself, is standing there arguing with an admiral. Admiral Sulla by this time has convinced himself that not only was the Coalition military a failure, but also that the rest of the United Worlds would see it too. And with Tyrus's help, he would be able to create an actual cohesive force that would be able to beat back the Savages, be able to withstand the Savages. A foreign legion on the front lines against the Savage hordes, the Legion. He feels so strongly that this is the way to go, and not to nuke yet another planet, which is what Tyrus Rechs is about to do, that he tells Tyrus that he's going to evacuate all he can right now and return in 48 hours. But then he gives Tyrus an ultimatum. If Tyrus doesn't agree to return in 48 hours and evacuate without setting off the trigger nuke before then, Casper himself will give up evacuating anyone and just go with Tyrus right now to set off the nuke and let the galaxy figure itself out. So Tyrus agrees. Some soldiers there with him volunteer to go and help, even including Wildman and McAfee. So this small group goes with Tyrus Rechs to take the trigger nuke to the grounded Savage Hulk, while Admiral Sulla takes the wounded back out, dodging the other circling Savage Hulks. The city of New Vega was actually built on top of the original colony ship that left Earth, so when the Savages landed they started digging and went straight down to that ship. They built tanks full of preservative, and put all the people they captured into them to be used as calories. This group of Savages that had landed on New Vega were human brains inside of metal bodies, and so they didn't need to eat or drink. They just sipped at the calories in the tanks, and were able to extend their lives seemingly forever. But that also meant the calorie storage was their greatest weakness, and would defend it above all else. After some twists and turns, random encounters with Savages, and near-death close-quarters fighting, Tyrus Rechs and his group run into a convoy of Savages taking prisoners to become calories. They are able to rescue these prisoners, but during this, the wild man has to become bait and go off by himself on a motorcycle. Tyrus and his group with the nuke split up from McAfee with the rest in the other group, while McAfee and his group head back with the people they had rescued to their rendezvous point to meet up with Admiral Sulla. Tyrus and the rest of his group are able to drop off the trigger nuke, arm it, and head back to save the other group that had left earlier. When they all meet back up, McAfee lets Tyrus know that Wildman was captured. So Tyrus does what he typically does and goes back to save the Wildman. When asked, he responds with, while everyone else heads back to the rendezvous point, Tyrus Rechs heads all the way down with the tracker that McAfee gave him to find Wildman in the calorie storage and pull him out. He carries him back and gets topside in time to contact Admiral Sulla. By now, everyone in McAfee's group had already boarded. Admiral Sola braves incoming fire from the savages, but as close as he can get is the top of the nearest building, 75 floors up. Tyrus Rechs boards an elevator which is still functioning with Wildman, who is still unconscious from the preservative, and rides up 75 floors to the top of the building. When they get there at the roof, even with the mechanical assist from his armor, he is completely worn out and barely able to carry Wildman to the waiting ship. On board the ship, Tyrus Rechs decides to not activate the nuke, which is still armed, but chooses instead to try this new idea of Casper's, and the ship is able to evade the savages, escape, and head back to the United Worlds. So that is the end of the first book of the Savage Wars. My Prometheus video covers the events in the second book, and the sequel to this video covers the events of the third and final book of the Savage Wars Trilogy.